I need some traction. You need some traction.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Traction Webinars. I'm your host today, Vasil Azarov. I'm a founder of a brand new community of modern marketers and founders, Growth Blazers, previously a founder of Growth Marketing Conference. And I'm super excited to introduce our guest and featured speaker in just a moment. This webinar is a reminder brought to you by Boast.ai, Launch Academy, and partners. And our presenter today is Brandon Redlinger, who is a head of product and marketing at ringDNA, the revenue acceleration platform that empowers every member of your sales team. And previously, he was a head of growth at many Silicon Valley venture-backed startup, including Engagio, recently acquired by Demandbase. He's passionate about intersection between technology, psychology, and especially how it applies to growing your business. We'll talk all about it today. Brandon, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for that intro, Vasil. I really appreciate it, man, and good to be here.
Excellent. Thank you for joining our Traction webinar. Today, a reminder for everyone, we'll kick off with a presentation. Brandon will share some actionable strategies on how to do your demand generation the right way. We'll talk about growth. We'll talk about becoming how to grow as a growth marketer. So prepare your questions. We'll get to as many as we can at the end of the Q&A. And quick note, submit your questions by using the Q&A function, not the general chat. So Brandon, before we dive into the ultimate guide to demand generation, I wanted to ask you to kick us off. We've known each other for many years, and it's impressive to see how you've grown professionally, how you innovated. What advice would you give to a marketer at the very beginning of his or her career?
Yeah, great question. I would say yes to as many things as possible. And honestly, like one of the biggest things that has helped me in my career is connecting with other marketers, connecting, networking, joining communities like the one you just launched, right? And I actually, that's how you and I initially connected. And then we've introed each other to many people over the years too. So yeah, it was back when you launched Traction Conference. I think maybe I just reached out cold to you and we just started having a conversation, and then every once in a while I would meet up and geek out about growth, and I think I would advise people to do exactly that, is go out, network with people, join communities, and say yes to a lot of stuff.
Love it. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. The Ultimate Guide to Demand Generation by Brandon Redlinger.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Vasil. And as Vasil mentioned, I've been the first marketing hire at a few companies. I've also been a founder myself. So I started my career in health and wellness, and I launched my own business. And the way I learned was really just kind of diving into the deep end. In my training, they didn't actually teach you anything about running a business. I just thought I had to, get my certifications, personal training and health coaching and nutrition, and, would hang my shingle up and people would come pounding down my door, but definitely not the case, which is why I actually dove into the growth and demand gen side of things and ended up loving it and took my career kind of in that direction. So I know what a lot of you are going through for sure. Yeah, as we still mentioned, this is kind of our agenda today, but we'll talk about the perfect growth marketer profile. I want to go over the framework that I've developed over the years for growth and demand gen, and then I want to wrap it up with how brand demand and ABM all work together, because ABM is another one of those kind of hot topics that everyone's talking about. So with that said, let's just jump right in. Now, the first thing I actually wanted to cover, and Vasil, I'll get your opinion on this too, because I know you have some thoughts, but what is the difference between growth marketing and demand generation? Now, I'll tell you, we were talking about this before. I think we have similar views, but a lot of the growth marketers that I see really do come from the B2C space. Or if they are in B2B, they're in more of a product-led growth company. And I think finally this, the stigma around growth is starting to, wane a little bit. I think a lot of times people were just like, when you say growth, they immediately connected it with like growth hacking. And that, and I feel like demand gen kind of went through that hype cycle, and then ABM is kind of going through that same hype cycle right now. Like everyone was all on board on ABM, and then now they're like, oh, not another ABM guy, or not another person who's going to talk about ABM. But that's how I kind of see it, is like growth more on the B2C or product-led growth, and then kind of everyone else's demand gen. So I don't know what you see out there, Vasil.
I'm seeing the same thing. And when we launched B2B initiative at Growth Marketing Conference a few years back, as you mentioned, a lot of professionals thought that, well, this is going to be about growth hacking, but we actually targeted a larger enterprise demand gen segment as an audience and invited speakers from companies like G2, Gong to speak. And interesting enough, there were some very big similarities that we've noticed between, growth and the approach, ABM, how to do the ABM the right way, that use very similar frameworks that I used when it comes to growth marketing. So I'm sure this is something that we'll talk about today.
Yeah, exactly. And I was actually looking through some growth marketers' profiles beforehand, and just some of the people that I know and who have the title growth marketing, who are in B2B. And I look at their jobs, the responsibilities that they actually do, and it's just demand gen. Like it's synonymous with demand gen. So anyway, that's what I'm seeing. Just wanted to cover that really quickly because I do get questions from people that are like, "What is the difference?" And honestly, it's going to vary across the board. But I think whether you're in growth marketing or whether you're in demand generation, I think today's presentation will be very relevant.
Yeah, it's all about driving growth.
Exactly. That's what demand gen is still. All right. So I do want to start off with what I think is the perfect marketer's profile, whether you're in demand gen or you're in growth marketing. And you guys may have heard of this concept before, but it's called the T-shaped marketer. I first learned about it from a guy named Brian Balfour. I think it was written, he was actually referencing someone else that he heard it from, but I really like Brian Balfour's breakdown of this. So the T-shaped marketer starts out with this real, base knowledge. This is stuff that is going to be useful for you, whether you're in marketing or not. Now, you may have a different view of what this base is, but I put some things in here just as an example, right? Like behavioral psychology. A lot of what sales is these days, I think, is behavioral psychology. A lot of what product in UX and UI is behavioral psychology. So a lot of these things here are just going to be foundational, like storytelling. Any leader needs a good ability to tell stories and communicate, right? So there's this base knowledge. Again, don't take these specific things in here. Like you may differ that from me on whether data and analytics is one of those base knowledge foundations, but the principle still holds true. Then there's this next layer where we get into some more marketing specific skills, and these are going to be things like copywriting, and like a lot of times these days is video. Probably back when I heard about this this framework, HTML and CSS was like, I remember everyone saying, if you are a marketer these days, you need to know how to code a website at the very least. I think these days that might actually be a little bit less relevant because a lot of tools and technology out there are making it easy for marketers to do highly technical things without having to be super technical. But again, the concept here is just a base, another like layer where you are going a little bit deeper on those marketing specific skills. And then the next layer where the T actually comes in is your actual channel expertise. So these are actual channels that you would use and getting knowledge of those channels and then going very deep on a few of them. And, you know, again, which ones you go very deep on, what the actual T is for you is going to be different, but the concept applies here. So yours might look a little bit different, might look a little something like this, where you go really deep on PR and maybe you're, you know, pretty good on social, but conversion rate optimization and ads and viral marketing, you know, you don't have any experience with. And that's fine too. It could look like this, where you're a little bit more even across the board. Again, you do go deep on one specific thing that is your main expertise, but you want to have a good experience across the board. Or it could look like this. Again, the main point being, this is the concept, and this is what I think every marketer should strive for. Have that base knowledge, then have that real solid marketing foundation, then start to pick up channel expertise. And you could start with one and then build on top of that. Like me personally, I really started off my career in content. And then I, you know, most recently went deep in ABM because I worked at an ABM company for the last 4.5 years. So yours is going to be different, but again, that is the main concept here. All right, now I really want to dive into what I put together as my 6-step growth framework. And very briefly, at a high level, this is what it looks like. There's the ideation phase, there's prioritizing your ideas, there's putting together your growth brief and documentation, then there's running the experiment itself, then there's the next phase of optimizing that experiment, and then finally there's automating that. But it's never actually that linear going from one stage to the next to the next. It usually looks a little bit more like this. So I'll walk through each phase and what that entails, but you know, it always starts off with ideating, and then it goes to prioritizing, and then you put your brief together. I think a lot of people skip the brief. I'll show you exactly what I put in my brief, and then you run the experiment. And then you say, does it work? Did it not work? Maybe we need to test and tweak a few things. So let's go back to our brief, and then let's do another experiment, and let's go back to the brief. Or you might run the experiment and say it fails. All right, we know that this didn't hit the success metrics, so let's cut it. Let's move on to the next one. So we go back. What is the next experiment? What's the next idea that we've prioritized? Now let's run that again. And then you might get to the point where you feel really comfortable with where you're at with that. And then you would be starting to optimize it. All right, how do we really get the most out of this experiment or this channel or whatever it might be? And then you can do a few iterations on that. And then once you really prove that out, once you get to a point where you really feel comfortable automating it and you know it will predictably deliver what you are looking for it to deliver, you can start to automate that. So let's go through that really quick. So in the ideate phase, it's very important to get multiple stakeholders involved. It's not just you coming up with whatever ideas that you want to, you know, test. It's the main stakeholders, the main business stakeholders. So in a product-led growth company, you are going to want, you know, product involved because you'll be experimenting pretty heavily in the product itself, and usually you want sales involved. And another one that I think people miss all the time is actually customer success, because these are the people who really face the most downstream effects from the stuff that you are doing, because they might have insights into what is actually a good customer. Sure, they might have bought from you, but that doesn't mean that it's actually worth it all the time. They might be the biggest headache. They might be always asking for discounts or taking up your success engineers or your customer success managers' time the most. And they will have a good idea for you know, what is going to be a good experiment and what is not as well. So definitely include the success of the post-sales team as well. And then I always keep a backlog of ideas and document what has worked and what hasn't. So I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit too. All right, and then the next step is once I have all of my ideas, then I want to prioritize them. I want to stack rank them. And a framework that I really like from this that I got from Morgan Brown, who's just another badass growth guy out there, is scale it based off of impact, confidence, and ease. Impact, what impact do I think this is actually going to have on the business? Confidence, what's my confidence that this is actually going to work? And then ease, how easy do I think it is going to be to actually implement this and execute on the experiment? Now, I've seen some people who scale it from 1 to 3. I've seen people who do it from 1 to 10. I like kind of a nice Goldilocks, just right in the middle scale, because I think if you do just 1 to 3, then you end up with a lot of experiments with the exact same score. So how do you figure out what to prioritize from there? I also avoid 1 to 10 because I don't think you really can properly kind of scale or put something on that scale from 1 to 10. I don't think you're going to know with that granularity with what is going to work and what's not. So that's why I like kind of a nice Goldilocks in between 1 through 5. So once you stack rank that, then you can take your top experiment and then put together your growth brief. Now, my growth brief usually includes these key things. So there's the type. Is it just doing research, or are we starting to experiment? Are we in the automate phase, or are we in the optimize phase? Timeline, I usually like to do 2-week sprints. I think that's pretty standard. Objective, what are we really aiming to do? Why are we doing this? My hypothesis, I think that's an important one that I think people skip to, is what do I actually think is going to happen here? And then what is the method I'm going to use to test that? What are my metrics? And most importantly, what's my definition of success here? So that tells me when I should be cutting it or when I should be trying to continue to optimize it or test and tweak it. And then at the end, you should always fill out your recommendation, whether, especially if the recommendation is to actually stop and go on to the next one, just cut it. Because a lot of times I've seen this happen. A new leader comes on board or another marketer comes on board and they suggest something that we've already tested. Then you can look back and say, well, here was the test, here's what happened, here's our recommendation and why we stopped doing it. They might say, well, maybe we should do it this other way instead. And you say, we didn't try that, we didn't think of that, maybe it will work. Or they could look at it and say, all right, you're right, let's scratch that idea. Too many times I've seen people, they're new, they come on board, they say, hey, we need to do this. And then the team says, oh, we already tried that. And they're like, well, you probably did it wrong. Let's do it anyway. And then you fail. And then it's a lot of wasted cycles on something that won't work already. So that's why I think the recommendations, especially the documentation of the failed experiments, is very important. All right, and then run the experiment. And the key here is to run it as quickly and as at low risk as you can. And then again, if you fail in the experiment, which you will probably have more failures than successes, to be honest, then go reprioritize and then start testing again. Now, I would go back to the initial ideation phase once every quarter. I like once every quarter because a lot of companies out there these days are on an MBO or on an OKR, a quarterly OKR system. And I think it's a great way for you to make sure that all of your things ladder up to the overall business objectives. So if it's still within the quarter, go back to step 2. If you're at the beginning of a new quarter, again, go back, do your ideation phase, and then run through all the steps. So once you're experimenting, and you feel pretty good about it, now it's time to really optimize. This is about more finer refinement, testing, tweaking things. And again, you want to test as quickly as possible and come up with, continue filling out your growth briefs with just a new date, a new basically section of the document that's filling in those same things. Your hypothesis, your method might not change that much, but I think it's important to still continue to document what you are doing at each phase. And then after you really feel good about it being predictive in delivering what you want it to deliver, then that's when you can either automate it with people, hire a headcount to do it. Maybe it's an agency, bring on an agency. I get that question a lot, actually. When should I bring on an agency? I really do feel like you personally need to be the one to prove out that channel, prove out whatever it is that you're bringing the agency on first, before you actually just bring them on, or before they say, hey, here's the presentation, here's what we're going to deliver for you. Why don't you test that out first before signing a year contract? So I think, again, before any headcount, test it out yourself, or bringing on new tools. Same deal, right? You don't want to sign a year contract, a $20,000 contract or more. If you're in the enterprise space, those tools can cost a lot of money. So before bringing on those tools, make sure that you test and prove the channel out first. Now, this is just a really quick slide because I get this question a lot. What should be a demand gen marketer in a demand gen marketer's tech stack? Now, I think these are some of the key ones, CRM, marketing automation platform. I've always used Salesforce, and I think Marketo is my preference for a marketing automation platform, though I've used HubSpot and I've used some of the other real SMB ones, but I'm a big fan of Marketo, and I've used Marketo. I think it's the most powerful one out there, but it actually takes a lot. The learning curve from that is actually pretty long. And ABM, especially if you are a B2B company doing longer sales cycles. We'll talk about ABM again in a little bit. There's your data platforms. I think ZoomInfo is kind of the best one out there for enrichment and data, contact data, and everything like that. Since they've acquired a bunch of companies over the years. There's APIs like your Tray or Zapier or Workato that are just making sure all of your systems are connected. And then there's, if it's not already built into your marketing automation platform or your content management system, something for landing pages, because I think a lot of the tests that we'll be running as marketers and as growth marketers are actually on landing pages. So something like Unbounce is perfect. And then content, and again, your content management system, your webinars, your chat, your SEO, video, podcasting. Podcasting is a huge one these days that I think a lot more people are kind of latching onto. And the way I see it is kind of podcasting is the new blogging. You kind of have to have one these days. And I get a lot of questions about, is it too late to jump on a podcast? Absolutely not. If you go to the podcast player of your choice and you search whatever your specific category is, there's likely maybe a handful at best of podcasts. Half of them probably only have 20 episodes and they stopped doing them. I think podcasting still is in its infancy. I'm a big fan of podcasting myself. And then there's the actual distribution. So there's creating the content, but you have to actually make sure you get it out there and get it in front of the people you want to get in front of. And then there, under that is, your search engine marketing, your advertising, social media, content syndication, email, direct mail. And then of course, I wouldn't be a good marketer if I didn't measure everything. So there's your dashboards actually showing all of your metrics and your data. There's the routing, the scoring, the analytics, and testing and optimizing. I almost added another section for sales enablement because I think ultimately, like, that is marketing's job, is to support and make sales easier for your company. But I didn't want to dive too far into that because I think again the lines blur between what jobs people do these days. I think it varies from company to company, but at the end of the day, I do think, our jobs as marketers are to support sales and make sales easier. Some of you may disagree with that, but I will stand strong on that one. Okay, and then one last thing here is kind of a minimum viable team for either growth marketing or demand generation. So let's start with a sales-led, more more B2B looking structure here. You have your head of marketing. Then you're going to have two kind of profiles of marketers. You're going to have more your creative person responsible for things like the art and the copy itself and the overall flow of the experience that a prospect goes through. Usually that's under demand gen. If you want to outsource the art itself, great, but that person's going to be responsible for approving that, right? Then you have the MOPS person who really connects all of your systems, makes sure all of your data flows, and just makes sure the reporting is regular and accurate as well. And then there's also the task of maintaining all of the data and making sure your CRM is nice and clean. That person is going to be key in any demand gen function. That is my first hire every single time in a sales-led demand gen team, 100%. Then if we look at more of a product-led approach, so you have your head of marketing, then you have your growth marketer, who's again, similar profile to the demand gen marketer. Then you have your data analyst, again, similar to the MOPS person, but a key person here is your growth engineer. Now, this is a game changer for me when I actually had one back when I was at a product-led growth company, because this person's going to be the one to actually go into the product. They're going to be highly technical. They're going to be able to code your changes up and then put it in front of the right segment of your audience. That person is going to be key. And I've seen it before where it's a dotted line because it's actually an engineer who just splits time. Right? In bigger teams, yeah, you'll have a true dedicated growth engineer on your team. You might have multiple. But a lot of times in smaller companies, you're just borrowing, maybe it's 50-50. In my case, it was 50-50. Half their time was spent under marketing, the other half was spent in engineering. Now, at bigger companies, you may actually have people who are specifically, you have your team that runs your experiments under specific products. So you may have 3 lines of products, you may have more. You'll have this team under every specific product too. Okay, now quick note on brand versus demand versus ABM and how they all kind of work together. So we know what demand generation is. That's what we've been talking about this whole time. I really like this graphic. It really kind of shows the flow of the customer all the way from demand gen to the win. I won't spend too much time here. I've seen similar graphics kind of floating around over the years, but I did specifically like this one. But let's talk about ABM, because that's another one of those things where everyone's talking about it these days, but very few know what it actually means and how to actually do it. So I'll read the definition real quick. Account-based marketing is a strategic approach that coordinates personalized marketing and sales efforts to open doors and deepen engagement at specific accounts. Now let's break that down really quick. So one, it's strategic. It's not a single tactic. It's not a single campaign. It is an overall go-to-market strategy. It's personalized, right? It is highly contextual, highly relevant to the audience that you are going after. It's both sales and marketing. It's not, account-based marketing, maybe the name itself is slightly misnomer, but it's not just for marketing. It is for sales too. And as I mentioned before, you might even want to get CX involved, because I think they are a very key stakeholder. And they are there to open doors and deepen engagement. So it's not just about net new, it's also about selling to your existing customer base. I actually have a friend who is a true enterprise sales rep. He has one single account, And his job this year is to get $35 million more from that single account. They're a customer. He's got to go find different business units and different people to sell to in different products that he can sell to them. So it really is a spectrum. And there are different flavors of ABM too. I've always followed this kind of tiered approach to ABM, where you have your true one-to-one ABM. You'll have a lot fewer of these. Then you have another tier. You could have 2 more tiers, but I do like the full 3 tier. I've seen people do great with 2 tiers. So you have your one to few, where you're relying a little bit more on customization. You're relying more on looking at their industries and their titles, but it's all about the segmentation. So you can't go too broad on that, or otherwise you're just doing kind of demand gen. And then you have your one to many, where you are starting to leverage tools a little bit more, and you're leveraging those industries and those titles even more. So there is a spectrum. And then at the other end of the spectrum is just, smart demand gen. So this is kind of how I think about the difference between ABM, like real pure ABM, and then demand gen. So it really kind of depends on your company and where you're at, where you really fall in the spectrum. And some companies, a lot of companies in B2B these days definitely have both a strong ABM function and a demand gen function. And even a lot of times companies like Demandbase, where I was most recently at, the ABM function fell under demand gen. They just wanted to start doing what they knew worked in demand gen to a more specific personalized audience. Those logos that they really wanted to go after, that they really wanted to close, because it is a brand name, and it's going to bring in a lot more money for them. Again, the challenge is it's a lot longer of a sales cycle. It takes a lot more resources for the team to close those. But they are still doing both ABM and demand gen. As I mentioned, I was at an ABM company, and we probably split it right down the middle. Half of our efforts were demand gen, half were ABM. It's not all one or the other. And the next question I usually get is, all right, so where does brand sit in all of this? Oh, and here's actually one other slide I forgot I threw in here. One of the differences too between demand gen and ABM is just kind of where you start. A lot of people in demand gen start with what do we want to do, where are we going to say it, and then who we want to deliver that to. ABM is all about actually starting with the who. Who are we targeting first? Let's really make sure we're targeting the right people and refine that list as finely as possible. And then what do we say to them? And then how do we actually deliver that to them? And so where does brand really sit in all of this? I think brand is actually one of those very strategic things. It's not just putting billboards up and color brochures and everything. It really does actually start with internal company culture and the vision, and getting everyone aligned on that page first. And then from there, naturally, what everyone does will exude what their brand actually represents. And especially these days when everyone is on social media and there's so much interaction with customers these days, even engineers, even the support team they have so much interaction with their customers. Every single touch actually hurts or helps your brand. So that's why it really does, I think, start with that culture, the company culture, the company vision, and the image that you want to portray. So brand to me really is the most foundational piece of all this. And of course, I can't go without mentioning metrics. Here are the metrics that I like to measure. Again, I like to keep it simple. And of course, you will measure other things as well, but these are the important ones you want to keep your closest eye on. Brand, I like earned media. I don't love impression share that much, but it's one of those that I think you really do have to pay attention to a lot. And then a challenge with brand is you won't actually see direct results from a lot of those things. If you are doing great brand campaigns, it usually shows up as direct traffic, right? when it's time for someone to finally buy a product in your category, they're not going to go back to whatever brand campaign that was and then click on that ad. What they usually end up doing is just opening up a new browser and typing your URL directly in. So if you are seeing, like, it's a very indirect measurement, but I think that is probably one of the best ways to measure that brand is how much direct traffic you are getting. Demand is all about how many opportunities you are creating. A lot of people still are focused on how many leads am I getting at the top of the funnel. I think, again, useful to track, but don't pay as much attention to those. Do those leads actually turn into opportunities? Do those leads actually matter, right? A lead from, someone who just joined the team as an intern is going to be different than a lead who is actually, head of marketing at a company. Those will show up the same as a lead, but they won't show up the same as an opportunity. So that's why I'm focused so much on opportunities here. So sales qualified opportunities, I look at cost per opportunity, and then look at my opportunity conversion rates. And then ABM, I'm looking at all about the account, right? How much engagement do I have at this account? And is that engagement going up over time? And am I engaging the right people at that account too? Next, I'm looking at target account pipeline. How much pipeline is coming from target accounts, the accounts that I, again, defined are the most important to me? And then revenue, how much am I actually generating off of my account-based marketing efforts? All right, so I know that was a lot. That was actually a little bit longer than I kind of expected, but we can dive into some questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brandon. What a fantastic presentation for both beginners and advanced ABM marketers and demand gen professionals. I'm happy how you broke it down, everything step by step. So now let's go even deeper and I would like to focus on three areas. And for everyone who's listening in, please submit your questions by using the Q&A portion. You can find it right underneath the slides. So let's start by talking about team structure. Then we talk about growth experiments, and maybe we'll wrap up with demand gen and ABM alignment. So if you can go, Brandon, to that slide, sales-led growth versus exactly product-led growth. So one question for you, as you are, let's say, I know that we have a lot of founders in the audience who are hiring their first head of marketing currently. Let's imagine that. Mm-hmm. What would be the difference if hiring for sales-led organization versus product-led when you're looking for that leader who will manage these departments within the organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I think of sales-led marketing leaders, like, I'm looking at someone, a marketer, who really understands sales, like really understands the full funnel. Someone who knows that their job at the end of the day really is supporting, those sales efforts. When I'm looking at someone who has in the product-led growth function there, like, that's someone who really is, usually they're a little bit more technical. Usually they have a product background. So, a question that I've been getting a lot myself recently. So I have a new job. I'm, 2 weeks in. It is a head of product marketing job, not head of demand gen, not head of growth, not anything that people actually were expecting to see on my profile, but I think that is I really do think the future of just business these days is being a lot more customer centric, a lot more with the consumerization of enterprise software. You can't get away these days with building just a mediocre product and delivering a mediocre experience and then just selling the hell out of it. You actually have to build something that people like using, that they want to use, and that's pretty easy and intuitive. Like, I go back to like the Marketo and the Eloquas, just because a lot of my experiences with people who actually were responsible for building that. So I worked for John Miller for 4.5 years, John Miller being the guy who started Marketo and the guy who started Engagio. And I look at those, I'm not sure Marketo or Eloqua or some of those other ones really would have succeeded these days because of how clunky and hard it was to use. You know, there's so many competitors these days in a lot of different categories. There weren't that many back then. So I think just the strength of kind of what you could do with the product outweighed how easy it was for you to actually use the product. So that's why I'm like, I want to dive fully into the product side of things and really become that master. So that's kind of the product led growth.
Yeah, it makes sense, and I'm glad you included added growth engineer to the mix because we've been getting a lot of questions lately. What is that role? What do they really do? And I recently, just out of curiosity, talked to a few growth engineers to try to understand their role, and
Mm.
they're actually saying that I wish that more of the marketing executives would actually sit down with us and ask us how. How can they be efficient in the what kind of tasks they could assign to them, because growth engineers have so many ideas, and I see that there's a big opportunity to bring those two together, really knowing that what kind of projects growth engineers capable on executing, driving these growth experiments.
Yeah, 100%. As soon as I got that growth engineer under me at Versus like you, like that was such a game changer because of course I can, I can learn some of the tools. I can, take coding classes as much as I can, but like that's second nature to these growth engineers, and they can execute on that a lot quicker. And like they know all the tools, they know all the technology so much better than I ever could. So I mean, yeah, growth engineering is definitely key, especially these days. Like I think like, even with how easy it is for non-technical marketers to do technical things, like no one's ever going to do it as good and as quickly as a growth engineer.
Yeah, 100% agree. So while we're on the team structure theme, so let's take a question from Campbell. Where does product marketing fit in your team structure slide?
Yeah, so I'm really in the kind of John Miller camp of how how marketing teams should be structured. So John Miller does think of it as either that there's three main pillars under marketing. There's product marketing, there's demand generation, and there's corporate communications. And actually, talking to a lot of heads of marketing and CMOs out there, it's actually pretty similar. Like some of the specifics where they put things like PR or where they put customer marketing kind of might differ from company to company, but the main functions themselves really are going to play out like that. Now, so this is, demand gen slash growth. That's where companies usually start. Where they do add next usually is that product marketing side of things. And then usually last to come is the corporate communications function. But I really do think that like those are the main pillars of your marketing team. And that's kind of the order that you should build them out in. So this is really just if you're starting out on your marketing team and you're looking to, your series, maybe your seed series or series A, this is where I would start because it's all about testing. It's all about finding the right audience. It's about finding the right product. It's about building something that people are going to find value in.
And just to add to that, what I also been noticing, depending on the size of the company, in some early stage startups and companies, uh, product marketer usually takes on the role of product manager often. But
Mm-hmm.
when it goes to the larger company, this enterprise, it's very often that product marketing roles are more like about positioning, right? And there's like a layer of brand added to it. Is it something that you also see in Brandon?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times in smaller companies, yeah, it's your PM that's doing a lot of the product marketing stuff. So yeah, when I think of product marketing, so I actually had a friend ask me this question yesterday. well, I don't actually know what product marketing is. What is product marketing? The way I see it is, it really is kind of five key pillars. There's your market research, there's your messaging and positioning, there's sales enablement, there's kind of your go to market, your launch, and then there's pricing and packaging. In smaller companies, those all those functions still exist, but most of them don't actually fall under marketing, won't fall under this demand gen team, right? Sales will usually own packaging and pricing. Maybe your CEO actually still owns that. Sales enablement still usually falls under sales. Positioning and messaging, that's your marketing leader. Launch strategy, it's probably your PM, right? So yeah, early companies, those still all exist, but marketing's not, this demand gen team's not the one responsible for that.
Yeah, I feel we need to create a presentation, the role of product marketer. I really
Yeah.
like that
Yeah,
structure
totally.
that you outlined here. So let's move on and let's talk about growth experiments now. And I love the question from Serge. Would love to hear your thoughts on it. If we run experiments, and I love that you pointed out the role of the growth brief and recommendations that we need to document, right? What do you think? Would it even make sense to create an open source database of the experiments that actually worked for the similar types of company? Is something like that exist, or is it something that is super individual for each of the company and wouldn't make sense to have some type of experiments that everybody can
Yeah.
run?
Oh man, I would love that, to be honest. I think it's a great idea. It's like, what yeah, what's your go to market? Is it sales led, or is it product led? What size company are you? Maybe what industry are you in? And then kind of list a bunch of experiments, kind of, yeah, open source. I love that idea. I definitely think it could be useful. I love that. Just like I love it just for like getting ideas for things to test too, right? And then maybe to help you prioritize your tests too. Um, but I do think a lot of people should just really be testing everything for their own company, for their own business, their own market, everything like that. But just having a place to start, I think, would be a huge benefit to the community.
Yeah, somebody needs to build it. I see Yusuf comments. Not sure if people from the same industry would be willing to share. It will saturate their channel. Well, if anybody knows of the service like that that already exists, we would love to hear about it. Definitely let us know.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's see what else we got. While I'm reviewing the questions on the, experimentation, why don't you share, Brandon? You posted on LinkedIn recently, and the main idea behind the post is you ran many experiments. Some of them worked, some of them didn't, but it's always a learning
Yeah.
experience from the even from the failures. But you also mentioned that you spent 17,000 on a campaign that only generated 6 leads. Can you maybe walk us through it? I'm just curious whether you followed your template for this specific experiment, what the experiment was, and I'm assuming you were not necessarily satisfied with the result, right? And
Definitely not satisfied. Yeah, agreed. Some companies, like, yeah, that all they need is like one deal, and 6 leads is fine, and they're as long as they're hot leads. But no, definitely not the outcome that I wanted. It was actually a sponsorship spot, across a few things, and yeah, it was kind of a brand play. It was, yeah, in all honesty, it was one of those things where the CEO just came over the top and was like, I want to try this. Like, I don't care what you think. We're executing on that. But I think having this brief and having that experimental mindset actually really helps here, because like a CEO, sometimes they're pretty overpowering, right? Or maybe it's a head of marketing will come to you and say, we need to do this. And you're like, great, we're going to test it. We're going to put it through the usual tests that we do to figure out, yeah, is it the right thing, or is it not the right thing? Because otherwise I easily could have seen us spend 50,000 across the whole year, just signed a contract for 50,000 for sponsorships, for all these things that really didn't amount to anything at all. Luckily we had a little bit more funding in that company. It wasn't like, 17,000 is really going to break the bank for us. But I do think, like, when a CEO comes to you and says, I want to do this thing, having this growth mindset and having these things in place can save you a lot of time and energy and money. Like, that was a quick experiment that we ran, and it turns out really didn't get the results that he thought it was going to get. Great. I don't have to think about doing that thing again,
Yeah, so I'm assuming a CEO received the recommendations of this brief afterwards.
Exactly. So yeah, we haven't done anything like that since. And now I can actually pull that out. If my CMO today says, hey, we should try sponsorship, this specific sponsorship, I just got to go get my brief and say, well, we tried it a few years ago. If you have a different idea on how we should be executing on it, great. Otherwise, I think let's move on to the next idea.
Makes sense. Great. So both Mark and Yusuf asked questions related to comparing experiments and test results. So how much attention do you pay to statistical significance? What experiment size do you think is big enough to be able to confidently label something as a success or failure?
I'm glad they asked that, because I strongly believe that people should not wait for statistical significance, because you are waiting way too long. A lot of times, like, marketers like us, we've done, like, we've done plenty of marketing before. We know, intuitively, like, what's working, what's not. And I actually asked this very question to Heaton Shaw, who's, another one of those kind of marketing badasses out there. Like, that guy might be one of the smartest marketers out there. And yeah, he said, look, just use your intuition. You as a marketer, you'll be running these experiments all the time. You'll get a good feel for what's going to lead to success and what's not. You cannot wait for statistical significance, because you'll be waiting for months or even, maybe a year to actually get those kinds of numbers. But as long as you continue testing, it will eventually, over time, the right answer will show up. So maybe your intuition was off in the beginning, in the initial, like, testing phase. It might come up later when you get to the optimize phase, that, oh, I'm losing confidence in this actually playing out like I wanted it to. So I don't know if that made sense or not, but I really don't think you should wait for statistical significance. I know the engineers out there really always want, I always got that from the engineers, like, we don't have statistical significance yet. I don't think we actually need it, to be honest.
Got it. So a quick follow-up on that. So if you added success definition to the growth brief, do you also think about the failure definition, meaning that you have to stop now? Means that we failed, or that being said, also not to stop the experiments before really it achieves its full potential down the road.
I love that a lot. Yeah, exactly. Like, setting the real bottom kind of level. If we at least don't hit this, we need to cut it immediately. Yeah. No, I love that addition.
All right, makes sense. So let's see what else, if we have anything else on the growth experiments. So we got a question on the favorite stack for the growth marketer. I think we covered the demand gen stack. Would be a similar stack that you would say, well, yeah, what are your thoughts? Demand gen stack versus growth marketer tech stack?
I think it's going to be relatively similar, though you might have a little bit more on the, like, yeah, like, kind of, I don't know what you would call it, like web or, data side of things. I think it's gonna, honestly, I think it's relatively similar. Yeah, you might not have ABM in there. You might not do video, direct mail, some of those, like, heavy, B2B plays these days. But I think it's probably relatively similar. Yeah, I'm just trying to think back into previous companies that I've done growth at. I think it's all there.
Yeah, maybe like I don't know if by testing optimizing you actually meant that, but maybe like having something like Airtable or the tools to record your growth experiments,
Yeah,
right?
project management tools, totally.
Yeah, maybe some growth people they do it everything still in Google Docs and it works, but Airtable is great for it, for example.
Absolutely.
Let's see where else we got. So actually, I wanted to make sure we address a question from Noah that came earlier, and it might be our last question for this webinar because unfortunately we're running out of time. So I want to give Brandon give you opportunity to go back to the last slide for the with the Q&A. Do you have your email address or Twitter, LinkedIn, the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I'm most active on LinkedIn. I'm less active on Twitter these days, and as Vasil and I were chatting about earlier, we're testing out Clubhouse, jumping on Clubhouse and seeing if that's going to be a good channel for the future. So connect with me on there, Brandon_Lee.
Excellent. I'm seeing all of the virtual webinar conference speakers be adding Clubhouse very soon. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna do that as well. So let's wrap up with a question from Noah. Can you share any channels or tactics that are working well for you right now? This is his first question. Well, actually, we talk the current growth tracking tool. So we use our current growth tracking tool, Trello, for both our current initiatives as well as backlogs and ideas. Okay, so any tips to get organized and what are the growth experiments? Maybe you can talk a little bit about, we talked about prioritization.
Yep.
Are there any growth experiments that you ran recently that worked surprisingly well? And how do you, yeah, what kind of tools do you use to keep them organized?
Yeah, totally. So one experiment that I recently ran with pretty good results. Um, um, well, I actually run a lot over LinkedIn, um, and a lot on the organic side, a lot on the paid side. If anyone knows the tool metadata.io, I'm a big fan of them. Go check them out. They're great for spinning up different campaigns of different tests and using different audiences and testing there. And oh my God, I'm blanking on the name of it. Um, oh Jesus, LinkedIn's like chat. I mean, it's like Drift, but for LinkedIn. What do you got? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Mm, hmm,
Oh gosh,
no,
hold on.
interesting.
Um,
Uh, I'd love
LinkedIn.
to try it.
Oh God, what is it called? Why am I blanking on it? Um,
Drift for LinkedIn.
that's kind of how I think. Maybe that's a bad definition of it, but that's like, uh, it's not in me. Oh my gosh, why am I blanking on this? I obviously haven't implemented it yet at ringDNA. Um, maybe someone else. No, why am I blanking on this?
LinkedIn Helper, Pulse, LinkedIn Navigator. I'm just reading the comments in the chat. Uh,
It's relatively. No, it's not any of those.
is it native to LinkedIn or is
Yeah,
it? Oh, okay, interesting.
yeah. But basically, you can upload a list or define your audience, and then send. Uh, it's almost like sending mass, in-mails to people,
Oh,
and
it's
then
like a
starting.
LinkedIn bot. Okay, I see.
Yeah, yeah, it's like a LinkedIn bot, right?
They're made.
So,
Yeah.
so starting off with again defining my audience. So, at Engagio and Demandbase, heavy ABM company always starts with who are our target accounts, and then offering them $100 gift card for a meeting right there on the spot. And it's kind of like Drift in the sense that like you're going back and forth chatting with someone, and right there natively on LinkedIn, and then getting those meetings right off the back of those $100 gift cards. We call them meeting makers. Um, that has been very surprising. That's one of those things that actually doesn't scale quite as easily because you have your high profile or your high target accounts, but you can't then just say, all right, now I'm going to send this to all heads of marketing at companies, 5,000 and above, because you'll end up with a lot of noise. You'll end up with a lot of people who are taking it just for the $100 itself, which is fine, to be honest. Like, I think as long as you have a sales team that you are confident in, then like it just gets them more at bats. Great, whatever, but that's something that actually doesn't scale as easily, but is great for like those real strategic like ABM accounts, or it might be a different amount for you, right? You just got to make sure it makes the economic business sense for you. So that was one thing that we did that was a great channel. But LinkedIn in general is great for us because sales reps and marketers are all over LinkedIn all day, every day, which is why I'm always active on there myself.
I love it. I wish we had time to go deep into this experiment. And I know that we should create in the future another deck specifically for LinkedIn and content creation and have you back, Brandon. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm looking forward to staying in touch and see all exciting things that you would do at the new company, ringDNA. Thanks everyone for joining another Traction webinar. And we are looking forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
I need some traction.